Okay, I'm going to get started. So I'm curious, how many people here write documentation currently? In their work or for fun? Okay, a few people. How many people are interested in writing documentation? How many people are really glad that they're not the ones who have to write the docs? Okay, so we've got a good mix here today. So I'm going to be talking about writing great docs as a bad writer. My name is Chris. I'm on the Vue.js core team, but this is me as an 8-year-old. I'm the one with a green shirt who looks very, very proud to have built a dinosaur at a museum. And I've always been really obsessed, really passionate about things. And right now, and for, the last maybe 15 years of my life, I've especially been really passionate about education and how to communicate things in ways that allow something in my mind to make sense in other people's minds. That just seems magical to me. My official title on the Vue team is Good Word Put Together. I made that up myself, along with most of the titles. So I work on the documentation, the core documentation particularly, and also a lot of things that affect the developer experience, because there's a lot of that, there's a lot of communication in all these other developer experience things as well. If you see a warning in your console or in your terminal, that's communication too. That is a form of documentation. So the overview for today, I'm going to talk about some things to do before writing. Then I'm going to talk a little about what to write. And then finally, some things to think about after writing. So before writing, first, this might sound weird, but I recommend before anything, just making the docs beautiful. You don't have to be a designer or anything. Find some kind of HTML template. If you're using Bootstrap or something, there are a lot of beautiful Bootstrap templates. Just get a nice environment so that when you're publishing something, it looks really, really good. And that not only helps the people who are going to be looking at your docs, and sometimes looking at your docs for hours at a time, but also for you, because you'll feel more proud of your work and you'll feel more of a draw to work on that because it already feels like something special, something nice before you've even started writing. Now, this might seem like a silly question, but I also want to address why we write docs in the first place. From a project perspective, if a feature doesn't exist, or if a feature isn't documented, it doesn't really exist yet. If users don't know about it and don't know how to use it, all that code, all that programming is wasted. It's useless. And how many people have projects that they're working on right now where they often have to tell people about this one really useful feature that no one knows about because it's not documented or buried somewhere in the docs? Yeah. How many people have encountered that before, where there's something they find out about that would have been really useful to know, but it wasn't in the docs, or it wasn't documented well? Wow, not everybody's hand is up. You are living blessed lives. So I want to introduce you to a new acronym, DDD, Documentation-Driven Development. This is something we did for Vue 2, and I really, really recommend it. I started doing it for more of my other projects as well. Writing the docs first, before you write any code, can help you figure out what's going to be difficult to explain so that when you're writing code, you're making sure that you're writing a library that will be easy to explain and therefore easy to use. There are so many times when I write the documentation afterwards where I realize, Gosh, I have to list 10 different caveats here where it's like, oh yeah, it'll work, except if you also do this at the same time. And you want to make sure you always use this library and never use that library. And I only realize how complicated things are when I have to explain it to someone else. But not just for the library, writing docs can also be personally useful. So I want to tell a little personal story. When I was a kid, I had a really severe speech impediment. It would sometimes take me 2 minutes to get out maybe a 3-word sentence. So I couldn't communicate. What I did instead is, while other kids were playing at recess, I went and collected rocks. And just put pretty rocks in my pocket. And then showed them to people. Because that's the only way I knew how to connect. And that got me really obsessed with communication. I'd look around and see other people talking to each other, and I'd see one person tell a joke, and the other person would laugh, and they'd want to hang out together. And I would try to make those same words, and it didn't work. And I wanted to know why. I wanted to know how you could use words to program people, really. To make them like you, to help them understand you, to help them understand something that you understand. And docs also give you permission to ask a lot of questions. Usually, there's not one person who happens to know everything about a project. And if there is that one person, they might not have time to write all the documentation. So if you're writing docs, you have an opportunity to ask hundreds of questions to all the people who know more about something than you do, who are on that project. And you're actually doing them a favor because they don't want to write the docs. And you can ask the silliest questions you want, the most basic questions, because you need to be able to answer those basic questions. And if you're afraid of seeming stupid, you can phrase it in ways like, how would you explain this? How would you explain what's going on here? And then you can become an expert simply because you have all of the experts at your beck and call. Like getting free consulting. I also want to talk about the goal of documentation. I think it's very important to have this in mind before starting to write anything. Some of you might have some ideas of what documentation is. Maybe it's to convey information. I don't think so, actually. I think that's incidental. Sometimes we'll convey information on the way to managing emotions. That is the only real purpose of documentation. We want people to feel smart, powerful, curious. We want their brains to be on fire. Because otherwise, people stop learning when they stop. Whether it's because they're bored, or they're frustrated, or they're confused. If they stop, they'll stop learning. And you've lost your connection with them. To not only transfer knowledge, but to also set a tone for your community. You've lost a big opportunity. But to keep their brains engaged, you need to define priorities. You need to know the people you're trying to engage. So something I strongly recommend is building personas. For those who aren't aware, this is basically building out character profiles for different people who might come and visit your docs. I recommend answering questions like, who are you serving? Who are these docs actually for? There might be a few different groups. If there are a few different groups, which are the most important groups? Actually rank them. How are they using your docs? Is it from their phone? Is it on their desktop computer? Is it on their laptop while on a train? What are they looking for? And this will be different for a lot of people. It's useful to come up with a lot of different stories, and very specific stories. Really, like, how did they learn about your project? Where are they? Is it noisy? Are they being interrupted? Are they native speakers? How much time do they have? There's so many questions that we could ask. And I think we should try to ask these questions and come up with a lot of different sort of personas, character profiles, a lot of different stories for where someone is coming from, what their problem is now, like what brought them to the docs, and what they're trying to get out of it, and how they're feeling. And especially, what do they fear? Because this engages people more than anything. I'm not saying scare people who are reading your docs. I don't think you should, make little, scare pop-ups to go boo or something like that to keep people engaged. That might get them excited, but they'll probably become very frustrated very soon. But if you know what they fear, you'll know how to address those fears and how to frame your documentation in a way that lets them know, like, I understand your fears, and I think I have solutions. That will keep people engaged for a long time. And of course, what do they need emotionally to keep going? That's the only purpose, especially when they're going through the docs for the first time. Because once again, people stop learning when they stop. I can't say that enough. It sounds so simple, but they stop learning when they stop. And then you've lost your connection to them. So a lot of people may be thinking now, like, so what? So like I have like a beautiful doc site. There's no text up there yet, but it's very beautiful. It's some wonderful lorem ipsum. And I know who my users are. I know who I'm trying to serve. I have some different ideas for what they might be looking for, what kind of situations they might be in. If you're still a bad writer, what does it matter? If you can't do anything with that information. So I'm going to teach you some tricks and also try to reframe the situation for you. So this is a quote I really like. If you study calligraphy, you will find that those who are not so clever usually become the best calligraphers. Those who are very clever with their hands often encounter great difficulty after they have reached a certain stage. This is also true in life, or this is also true in art and in Zen. It is true in life. From Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. It's a good read, by the way. And it's so true. The people who are sort of born naturally talented at something often have the most trouble after a certain point because they're used to things just coming naturally to them. They're not used to the struggle. And so when they encounter the struggle, they just give up. So in many ways, like, talent is a crutch. Like, the fact that you're here and that you're a bad writer is a fantastic thing. It means you have fewer limits. You have an opportunity to deconstruct what's happening. Deconstruct writing good documentation. Because you have to. Like, I had to. Like, in order to learn to communicate. These things didn't come naturally to me. Like, I couldn't speak and I couldn't pick up on a lot of the emotions that people were that other people were able to pick up on around me. So I learned to observe, and I learned to break it down, and I experimented. And I learned rules. And I wasn't afraid when things didn't come easily, because they had never come easily. Number one thing when becoming a better writer, I think, is building relationships. If you don't build relationships, you can never get feedback. I mean, basically, you're just like in a void. You don't even know if you're getting better. So build relationships with potential editors and community members. These editors do not have to be like professional editors at a publishing company. They could be, other people at your project, other people in the community, maybe someone who's writing that you admire, and you'd like them to take a look. It doesn't even matter if they know nothing about your project. Just seeing like what makes sense to them and what doesn't make sense to them will go a long way in figuring out where you can go better. And I also recommend teaching in person, one-on-one, as much as you can. Doing that in workshops or in courses. You could teach a course at a community center. That gives you so many opportunities to see like what is actually making sense to people. And when something clicks for someone, what is it that made it click? Because especially if you're an expert in something, it often won't be what you think will make it click for people. Any kind of expert like automatically becomes worse at explaining things. Like often the best explainer is the one who just learned how to do this. So keep talking to those people and use them as a resource, as reviewers. And also emotionally prepare for feedback, because I don't know about you, but even when I've asked someone for feedback because I know there's a problem, I sometimes get frustrated when they say that there's a problem. Because first drafts are always bad, no matter how good you get. Maybe unless you're like Stephen King, who apparently, puts out something like 100 books a year. I don't know. It's something absurd like that. And because first drafts are always bad, and often for me, often the 6th and sometimes 12th or 20th draft is still really bad, it's important to be vulnerable. This is how I feel sometimes when I get feedback. I am an artiste. Who are you to judge my work? Because sometimes I put a lot of thought and a lot of work into something. And I think wow, this time I've really nailed it. I have something beautiful. Everyone's going to think I'm a genius. And then I show it to someone else, and it is this is incomprehensible. What are you trying to do? I don't even know what you're trying to do. And so it's important to try to prepare yourself for that and take a step back, let go of your ego a little bit, and remember that this is part of the process. This is a normal part of the process. There are going to be a lot of things that don't work, even when you think they're brilliant. So don't get defensive and accept when something doesn't work. I know that's really, really hard, but try to accept it, because let me tell you, if you get defensive and you start arguing with the other person to explain, the person who's reviewing your work, to explain why your work is so brilliant, you will alienate them, and you'll never get feedback from them again, probably, or will very soon stop getting feedback from them, or get very simple feedback from them, because they won't feel safe, sharing what they actually think anymore. They'll just try to correct spelling mistakes and stuff like that, because Chris is a little sensitive, better not bad talk his work, even though he asked for feedback. So try really, really hard at that. It is important. And if you find you can't do that in person, Like, it's okay to request only asynchronous feedback so that, they look at it separately, and then they tell you what was wrong later. Or they, write you a document to tell you what was wrong, and you can read that, and then you can get angry, and then you can absorb it, and then you can ask, more questions to understand what went wrong. So we also need to organize our docs. Every piece of documentation is going to be a little bit different, but at least for technical projects, there are often like a few different categories that I want to share that you can think about right from the start to start organizing everything. One of those is intros. People who are learning for the first time or taking a deeper dive than they ever have before. So I often recommend having like a 5-minute intro. That just censors like why. Why should anyone like spend time working on this? What problem does it solve? What fears will it help you alleviate? And video format often works well for that because it's very low energy. People can watch a video passively. They don't need to be actively reading every word and scrolling and things like that. It's more of a lean back activity rather than a lean forward activity. Then I also recommend maybe a 20 to 30. This can also be maybe up to an hour, but try to keep it to 20 to 30. Intro of how does it feel? Give people a little taste of like what it feels to work with your project. And I recommend another intro. In the Vue docs, we call this the essentials. That is just what people have to know for 80% effectiveness. They maybe can't do everything in your library, and they maybe can't, they don't know how to work with every single use case, but they're 80% of the way there. And if you can keep that in under a day, and even ideally like in just one afternoon, like one Saturday afternoon, and they can become like 80% as productive as they will get, like that feels so good to people. They feel so powerful. Now there are also references, API listings, like all the different methods and different properties. Examples are cookbooks. These are when people want to, just see a quick example of how, your library integrates with X or something like that. And sometimes they prefer, seeing some code and then seeing it explained later. So that, these tend to be very, very code heavy and tend to be very specific. I recommend like the cookbook examples to be as specific as possible. And there are expert guides for in-depth topics. Like in the Vue docs, we have an in-depth topic on, server-side rendering or component registration. And also a style guide. People find this really useful in a lot of communities, just like having some basic best practices that they can follow with your library to know that they're doing the right thing. These can be hard to fit in sometimes, like in a more general intro guide. So a separate style guide can be a good way to have them listed, and also gives you a nice place to link to them throughout your documentation. And there's overlap between all of these. That's normal. Yeah, but I would recommend minimizing the repetition that you do and trying to link to other parts of your docs as much as possible. And it's okay while you're writing a doc to, stop and, go work on another part that you want to link to for a little bit and then come back. Sometimes that can help you decide like what details you actually need to include in this shorter mention of it. And also prepare for trade-offs, because there will be a lot of them. This is where that work we did up front before writing comes in handy. Do you want to keep things really simple? Or do you want to be really thorough? Do you want to cater more towards beginners or experts? Do you want to be really understandable? Or do you want to be accurate, the most accurate you can be? Sometimes it might be useful to say something that, maybe isn't quite true, but is true enough, because you don't want to get into, it's like, well, actually, if you look under the hood, what it's really doing is, people don't always need to know about that for every single use case of your library. It can be okay to keep things understandable, leave out some details, and then include them somewhere else in a more in-depth guide or in the API. Now, what to write for intros and guides? First, what to write first? I recommend always, at every step, maximizing power per effort. What is the one thing that is going to make your users feel the most powerful? Pardon?
The less effort they have to.
Yeah. Like with a tiny bit of effort. What will take the least amount of time, least amount of cognitive energy, but will still make them really, really powerful. And I try to make that decision all throughout, all of my intro guides. That's how I decide what order to introduce concepts. What's going to make people the most powerful for the least amount of effort? And the reason I do that is because that's what gets people's brains alive, on fire. They're finding out all these things, and it's oh wow, I just learned this one thing, and now I can do all these other things, and all these possibilities open up to me. And I learned this other thing, it's wow, all these other possibilities now open up to me too. But it's important to only introduce one concept at a time, one new concept. And count them, really, both in text and in code. Including language concepts. There might be more advanced language features that some people might not be familiar with. Be very aware of the assumptions that you're making. And declare them, somewhere near the beginnings of intros and guides and things like that. What should people know before they even get into your library? It's also important to be emotionally relevant. Tell a story, even if it's just an implied story. So for example, on our components page for Vue, we start out creating a little button counter. We show the code, we explain how it works, and they get a little demo. And it's extremely simple. We keep it as simple as possible. And then when we're using components, they can see, I can actually just place this tag over and over again. And I have 3 buttons. And they can see immediately how it works. There are these little self-contained stories that build on each other. So when people are learning about why data has to be a function, we actually show what would happen if data wasn't a function? Then you'd have all these buttons sharing the same internal state, and you can see anytime I click on any of them, the number goes up for all of them. And then we start talking about blog posts. This is something that users would probably actually build for their apps. We're keeping it relevant. They probably thought sometimes oh yeah, I've wanted to create blog posts before. It's very common. And then we build on that blog post example, just like we did for the button. And don't start with the solution or feature. That's often tempting. Like I want to tell people like right away, it's like, oh yeah, use this feature. This feature is really cool. But you actually need to start with the problem to be emotionally relevant to people. That's why using props, that's a bad heading. If I say using props and I don't even know what props are yet, this doesn't mean anything to me. Instead, I recommend maybe something like passing data to child components with props. And at this point, they know what data is. They know what child components are. And they're learning about props. And it's like, oh, OK, so props are the thing that helps me pass data. Passing data is the problem that we're solving. I'd also avoid humor for intercultural docs. This is a lesson I've kept having to learn over and over again. Every time I try to inject a little bit of humor, but it doesn't work across cultures. Certainly sarcasm and pop culture references, things like that, those should always be avoided. But even some things that I've thought would translate better across cultures sometimes haven't. Maybe it was just a little silly, and people, have felt kind of worried, in some cultures, if someone's looking over their screen and there's a picture of a cat, while they're reading their docs, it's it's a little silly, and everywhere has cats. And is there any culture that doesn't love cats? They must be monsters. But if someone's boss walks by and they see that, they might think oh, is this person just slacking off? But they're actually working. They're actually trying to look something up. And so that makes them a little bit anxious, actually, seeing that kind of humor. Now, granted, there are times where I inject a little bit of humor. So I have a grocery list example where the things in the grocery list are vegetables, cheese, and whatever else humans are supposed to eat, because I couldn't think of another food for some reason. It was really late. And I ended up keeping that in because I liked it. And so far, I haven't gotten any complaints about that one. But I might eventually, and if I do, then I'll remove it. It's also important to respect other people's time when you're writing. Proofread your own work, because if you have really sloppy work with a lot of typos and spelling mistakes and some sentences that just never finish, you'll get simple feedback. They'll tell you about those typos and those sentences that never finish. So reviewers can actually help you make docs great, unless they're already good. Put in that effort so that, use things like spell check, so that reviewers can just focus on the stuff that is really going to push your docs to the next level, rather than just making them passable. But it's also important to avoid obsessive perfectionism. And I've been guilty of this. Writing, working on something for over 2 weeks, because I'm still not quite happy, and maybe it's maybe I could find a better example, and then I just go nuts over it. But it really is important at some point to make sure that your docs are meeting some minimal standard, and then you can always go back and make it exceptional later. And this is actually a little quote from something I saw yesterday in Diana's talk. This is Diana Rodriguez yesterday, which is it's a really good talk. If you didn't get a chance to see it, and you have a chance to see it again sometime, definitely make the effort. Now, after writing, congratulations, you help people for free. Or maybe if you're employed to write the docs, then you got paid for it. But still, you helped a lot of people, you help people learn. That's great. How many people, when they saw this slide go up, like their stomach clenched a little bit? and they they just like, they wondered for a second, it's like, is he insulting me? Is he calling me an idiot? What did I do? So unfortunately, when you help people for free, it's important to learn how to cope with the abuse. As silly as it sounds. So sometimes you'll get a message like this in your docs, and I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. Now, F this, I effing hate Vue. I tried to install following the instructions, but the instructions are lies. They don't work. I don't understand how a major framework could have docs so terrible that not even installing works. Are you all just idiots? Yeah, you'll see stuff like this sometimes. So is this person just a jerk? Like, what do you do? What do you do in response? Do you just like berate, block, ban? You know, just like lay out all the reasons that they are wrong and that they will be alone forever? And then ban them on social media and then, you know, block them from, you know, the organization so that they can never open another issue? Sometimes, but it's important to keep in mind that it's not about you. Like, even if they're saying things that are really personal, it's still not about you. You know, this is something I used to be a high school, middle school teacher, and that's something that you learn very quickly in that profession. Like, everybody walks in with different baggage. And I want to tell a little story from when I was teaching, actually. So this is actually when I was student teaching at an inner city school in Lansing, and there was this kid in this science class called Dominic. His real name isn't Dominic, but I'm going to call him Dominic. And his job in life was just to make my life miserable, it seemed. Like, he would like sabotage experiments. He would annoy the other students. He would like throw things. And no matter what I tried to do, like how I tried to discipline him, how I tried to reason with him, it just wouldn't work. Like he was just a terror. And so I talked to another teacher about this, and told them about this student and asked them, like, what do you think I should do? Like, I feel like, should we try to get him like expelled or something? Like, he hasn't done anything like that outrageous yet, you know, like anything that like puts people in danger, but he's just like so disruptive. And he never learns. And she said to me, here's something I use. Take him outside in the hall one day and ask him one question. Is everything going okay? And I told her, I don't care if everything's going okay. Like, he's just a jerk. And I don't want to help him. I just want to make the problem go away. And she said, if you want the problem to go away, ask the question. You don't know what he's coming in with. Everybody's coming in with their own baggage. Ask him if everything's going okay, and try to be sincere. So I did. I took him out in the hall after he did something, again. Took about 2 minutes. And I asked him, is everything going okay? And there was just a moment of stunned silence. Like, he was ready for a fight. He was prepared to fight. He knew how to fight. But I had just broken the script. I had broken the cycle of hostility. And in a few seconds, he burst out crying. And he explained to me how his sister was in the hospital because while she was sitting at home watching TV, a bullet went through their house and hit her in the leg. And she's going to be okay. Like, she's still going to be able to walk and everything. You know, she's going to live. She's going to be okay. But his world was not. He was scared and afraid and feeling helpless. He didn't know things like this could happen. And he didn't know how to make it stop happening. He didn't know how to make sure she wouldn't get hit again, or that he might get hit and he might die. Like, he's learning for the first time in his life that anyone could die at any time, and he has no control. So we came up with a plan. I told him I'm sorry, and there's obviously nothing I can do about that. But I want to make his life easier if he's willing to make my life easier. So I told him at any time, when he's feeling frustrated, overwhelmed, he can just put his head in his arms on his desk, and I'll make sure no one bothers him. And I told the other teachers that too. Because otherwise, like, when he did that, he'd get yelled at. You know, they'd think he was like sleeping, not paying attention. He had no way to cope. And after that, I never had a single problem with him again. So it's worth investing in these relationships sometimes, showing that you care. When people say, I tried to run the command and it didn't work, and they give you a little angry face, this isn't probably going to work. You don't ask in this case, is everything going okay? So you might respond, no, it's not, it didn't work. Are you even listening? But what you can do to break the combative cycle is listen or read, mirror, tell them back what they're telling you, and validate their emotions. Let them know, like, it's okay, it's normal to feel that way, you feel this way sometimes too. And then negotiate the correct behavior. Because you still have to lay down rules for your community. So in this case, a way that you could respond is, it sounds like you've been working on this for a while and you're frustrated because the instructions aren't working. I'm sorry you're experiencing that. Disappointed face. I've had days like that too, and it's never fun. Could you provide more information on exactly what's happening and what you expect to see instead? For example, if you're seeing an error in the terminal, sharing it here would help us identify the problem and help you get unstuck. Smiley face. And also, if they've done something that violates the rules of your community, in this case, like calling us idiots, I also want to let you know that personal insults, like calling or implying people are stupid, is not tolerated in issues or other channels of communication in the Vue ecosystem, no matter how frustrated you are. If it persisted, we'd unfortunately have to ban you from all repos under the Vue.js organization, because we're committed to keeping this a friendly and productive space for both users and maintainers. Please don't hesitate if you have any questions about this policy. Smiley face. Let me tell you, 98% of the time, this solves the problem immediately. You never have another problem with that user. And sometimes they become productive contributors. And because you've modeled the behavior that you want to see in your community, like, that person is going to be more likely to exhibit that kind of behavior in the future. And a lot of times, they come back with something like, okay, I see now, my mistake. Thanks for taking the time, for all your great work. Sorry for my rant earlier. I just want to let you know that I really admire you, and you've helped me grow so much as a developer. I'm really looking forward to learning more about Vue. Like, it seems absolutely insane sometimes, like the turnarounds you get, once you validate someone's emotions. Because it was never about Vue. It was never about me. They had other stuff going on. Sometimes I've seen people, like, start talking about Vue, and then they go into, like, their relationships about women. So yeah, wow, clearly this isn't about Vue. So how to be friendlier than you are? How to act like you're happy? When you're really feeling like this? Your emotions matter too. I recommend using temperature, intensity, pace breathing. Use an ice pack to regulate your emotions when you're feeling angry. Do a little dance party or some exercise. Pace breathing, slow pace breathing. Self-soothe, watch some cat videos. And it's okay to seek validation if you just want someone else to tell you that you're actually not the monster this person online thinks you are. Also, abuse the truck out of emojis. They can help you come across as a lot more friendly than you really are in person. Phrases like "great question" can help people feel safe. Some final takeaways: don't just wait for feedback. Docs are a product, so do user testing. People stop learning when they stop. And take care of yourself, take care of others. And if someone reports a problem, there always is a problem. Might not be the problem they think it is, and it's probably not the solution they think, or the solution they think needs to be applied probably isn't right either. But if you dig deep enough, you will always find a problem. And then you can get a hug when someone sees you in person and they've just really loved your documentation. That's something I really enjoy sometimes when I've been able to make people's lives easier. Here's some resources. First of all, my wife, follow her on Twitter. She has she's taught me a lot about UX and information architecture and a lot of things where I didn't know that much about actually. Few books on writing well: Don't Make Me Think, Technically Wrong, and A Practical Guide to Information Architecture. I'll put these slides up later somewhere. The Docs community in Slack is also really useful. And that's it. Thanks. I'm Chris V. Fritz.